Talking with Linfield Wildcats head coach Joseph Smith. And Joseph, the Wildcats now 4 wins, no losses for the season. Most recently overcoming 2 touchdown deficits twice against your rival PLU, and came away with a 31-24 victory. Talk about that game and some of the highs and lows.
Well, I think certainly the high was coming out on top. That's a nice situation. Low probably being down 14-0. That's a pretty good hole to, I guess, dig for yourself right out of the gate. But I'm real pleased with how our guys responded to that. We've been scuffling a little bit in terms of just overall execution and some decision-making issues that we've been battling a little bit this year in terms of the penalties. So that made it for an ugly game. The penalties, I thought, were really the thing that kept us from probably moving the ball and scoring a lot more points than we did. We just really had some drive killers. Most of them earned, a few of them unearned, but that was just made it for a strange game. But I really loved how our defense responded. I thought they played poorly in the first quarter, even the first, maybe a little bit of the second quarter, but the second half they played great, and that definitely was a high, because anytime you can really put the clamps down on offense, you can win games.
And it must have felt good after the game when you looked down at the stat sheet and saw PLU limited to 19 net rushing yards. Talk about your defense and some of the people who stood up.
Well, that stands out in terms of just if you only have 19 yards rushing, it's tough to win any game in that situation. Obviously, they had more than that, but the 7 sacks, took away. I'm not sure what the yardage was, but probably 50 yards, I would assume. And so I thought our defensive line really got it going. McClanathan and Kyle and Kaylee. I thought those 3 ends really had great games on the edge and really kept their quarterback from getting in a rhythm, and that really disrupted their offensive rhythm and timing and tempo in the second half.
In the fourth quarter, both teams could have pulled the game out. PLU was driving for what could have been the winning touchdown and 2-point conversion, but the Wildcats stopped the Lutes on 4th and inches. Give us your thoughts on that play.
Well, that was a great play. We went from the outhouse to the penthouse real quick on that. The offsides was a killer, a silly penalty that obviously we fell for, and made it a 4th and 2 inches instead of 4th and 5 yards and 2 inches, as the referee pointed out. But really happy to see that. Our coaching staff does a great job preparing for things, and that certainly was a play that they've run traditionally, that or sneak, and I thought Coach Vaughn did a great job of a good, nice call and guessed right, and they defended that quite nicely.
Linfield's offense began the game quite shaky, and then at the end of the game, the totals revealed that you were 115 yards fewer than what the season average is. Any concerns offensively?
Well, certainly, that's a low for us, offensively, and you go back and watch the film, and it's just the penalties, just kept putting us in second and third and long situations. And, 1st and 25, 1st and 27. There's not a lot of plays on the card to get you out of those, and every time it wasn't just even the negative yards; it was the plays that it took away. Most of those penalties came on plays of great gain. So the net gain the net loss was huge. So, the penalties are what got us on offense, and some poor decision making. Mickey had some bad reads for him, made some poor decisions. And so the turnovers combined with the penalties are really what hampered us.
With the star tailback Josh Hill sidelined, you had to call on some kids who have never started a game. Steven Naska came in and did a good job, and his backup, John Schaefer, also had a fine performance. Talk about those 2 tailbacks.
Steven and Johnny both are good running backs, and as is Tavon and a few other kids on our team. So we have some depth there, and it was nice to see them get their chance to come in and perform in a big setting. And I know there were some nerves, I'm sure, floating around there in their stomachs, but both those guys performed well and ran hard. Did they? Is there some slack to pick up with Josh Payton? Certainly there is. He's exceptional. So really pleased with how the guys played and how hard they played. Can they play better? Yeah. Will they play better? Yeah.
And now to special teams. In the game, Linfield whistled for an illegal kick penalty on what looked like a successful 40-yard field goal attempt by Josh Kay. So Kay had to line up for a second attempt from 45 yards. That kick was no good. Talk about that penalty and about what the officials said was the problem on the play.
Well, there's an interpretation of using a device or material to aid in the kick, and Josh used a piece of the field, under my understanding, or a piece of pre-wrap or something to mark the spot of where they were going to hold it, and that's what they had called. So that's in the rule book. The interpretation of what that is and what aids the kick, is all open to subjection, but. It ended up being a big deal, and I would expect Josh to be able to step back and make that. A little disappointing that he couldn't make it again, and my hunch is he just a little rattled about the call and probably mad at the official and thinking about that and not the kick. So, good example of us needing to not do those types of things, number one, and number two, be able to handle it mentally and be able to make that kick again. We need to be able to do that if he's capable of that.
So now looking at the schedule, the Wildcats find themselves with another bye week. Then you play Whitworth on October 13th in the annual homecoming game. Whitworth now 5-0. They face 4-0 Willamette this week. Who do you like in that game? And what do you think about the results of the Northwest Conference so far?
I haven't given two thoughts about who will win and don't care. Those guys are all going to play. They're all good. I think Whitworth's a good football team. I think Willamette's a good football team. I think PLU is a very good football team. So I think any one of those three have a chance to win the conference still. And if we don't play well, that's the way that'll happen. But we're not playing great right now, so we've got to get better. But those guys are all legit title contenders, and a shoot the game could go to anybody. I think those are pretty evenly matched teams.
What will be the focus over the next 10 days?
We need to get back to basics a little bit. Some things that we've talked to our team about. This is the type of part of the season where your technique sometimes tends to be overshadowed by schematics demands in terms of facing team after team and adjusting what you do to their schemes. And so we need to really evaluate, just the simple things of our first, our stances and our first steps and some of the techniques in our routes and our basic tackling technique, all the fundamentals that we hit so hard early in the season before you're really game planning specifically for an opponent. Gives us a chance to maybe get back and do that and get healthy. We're still, for whatever reason, pretty banged up.
That's Wildcats head coach Joseph Smith.
Thank you.
Hey, Ben.
Hey,
Dive in.
Yeah, sorry, I was under the impression it's 12:30.
No problem.
You were mentioning a little bit that you guys are playing well right now. Is there almost a negative to having 2 bye weeks, idle weeks in such a short period of time?
Oh yeah, sure. I think it tests your your mental fortitude, all the above. You get out of your rhythm. You get a little lethargic, all those sorts of things. But there's some benefits too. So, as I mentioned, we are pretty banged up right now comparative to where we've been in some other years. So that's nice to have a chance to get healed up. That's probably the biggest benefit. And we're going to use this week, specifically to address some areas that we've identified that we want to address, and that'll give us a chance to do so.
When you mentioned banged up, can't help but look at the big two. Tyler didn't play last week. What's his status? Is he going to be back for the rest of the season, or is he done?
No, both Tyler and Josh are done for the year, so they won't be back.
How disappointing is that for you? I mean, Tyler came in as a preseason All-American, and Josh was, starting out the promising season.
Josh was having a more than a promising season. It's a big loss in terms of just, I think they're arguably the 2 best in the West Coast at their position. So, it hits us pretty hard. I think leadership-wise is an area that concerns me as a coach more than else, because they were 2 of our better leaders, those 2 and Mickey, and puts a little bit more burden on Mickey to and our other seniors and other players to kind of pick up the leadership mantle, so to speak. Performance-wise, the guys will step up. We have depth. Will they be as good as those two? No, individually. So it's got to be a collective effort to try to pick up the slack.
As you mentioned that John Schaefer had 83 yards or 88 yards, I guess, on Saturday and a big run there late. Is that kind of what you mentioned? Guys will step up.
Yeah, we always plan for depth. That's something we've been doing this a long time, and I'd like to say we never have All-Americans hurt, but it happens. And if you don't prepare for depth and don't prepare for that eventuality, then your season's lost. So we're far from that. We've got a good football team. We're going to continue to get better, and the depth is good. So yeah, John's a good football player. So is Tavon. So is Nasca, and we'll have more and more guys step into those roles.
How what can you point to with the two comebacks that you guys had in the first half on the road? A lot of teams fall down by 14 in the first few minutes. It's hard to dig a hole out.
Yeah, this team is a neat team. They're tough. They got a ton of grit, and they'll fight and scratch and claw. Part of that's why we're having so many dang penalties, is they're pretty tough, and they'll fight. And so we're having to find that fine line of not getting the penalties but still playing hard. So there was never any doubt on our team that our guys would keep competing and keep fighting, and I knew we'd get the score back into hand. It's just a matter of time. And, it's going to be, again, down to turnovers and penalties. If we don't have the turnovers, if we don't have the penalties, we win by 21 points. So.
Coming back, totally lost my train of thought there. Was something you were going to say. With those two tough road games back-to-back with the bye weeks, do you feel like you've seen a little bit more about your team? Like you mentioned, playing on the road.
Yeah, absolutely. The guys have been in two pretty adverse situations and come out on top, and so they've learned about their character a little bit, and they've been able to perform under pressure when it really counts on the road in a hostile place. So I really like that. We need to perform better, but they've performed at least well enough to win, and all those questions that start coming in your mind and doubts and naysayers, negativity, they've gone through that and battled through that, and that's a big maturing step for a lot of teams.
Defense have given up a few big plays in that first scoring play by them early, but held the rushing game to 19 yards, had some big sacks and stuff. How do you evaluate how your defense is playing right now?
Well, consistency is something that we got to keep working on defense. The talent's there, very fast and very disruptive, but we need to just continue to work on the basic fundamentals and consistency, and that'll come. The secondary will continue to get better and better as they get more starts and more time under their belt, and I think we're starting to see that.
You mentioned at the beginning of the season when we talked that you chose Whitworth, I think, to win the conference because you can vote for yourself. But that's another tough game coming up off of a bye week. Benefits of having them off of a bye week plus... Definitely,
from a schematic standpoint, you get more time to devote to what they do well and study them up. You're out of rhythm a little bit, so there's a give and take there. But yeah, it's a nice advantage to have.
Go ahead.
So, another slow start to a game on Saturday, 21-7 deficit early in the second quarter. Slow starts seemingly have become a theme for Linfield offense in 2012, whereas the past 3 years, Linfield was renowned for putting people away in the first half. Do you think the slow starts are happening so often?
Well, that's a good question. I don't really have any answers for that. I think some of that is it's just penalties. When I look at what has derailed our offense from scoring every drive, it's normally getting into a third and long, an unmanageable down, an unmanageable situation. That's kind of what's got us. early in the season, I'm not too worried about that because we played our most talented football teams early in the season this year. Menlo is an exceptionally good football team, and when they beat Wesley coming up here, I think everyone will realize that. Menlo's a wrecking machine. They're putting up 50 points on everybody and demolishing teams. I fully expect them to beat Wesley, who right now is the 6th rated team in the country. Cal Lutheran was a top rated team in the country, so I think we played 2 top 10 teams easily right out of the gate. Hardin-Simmons is better than, their talent is better than what they've shown against other teams. So, I still believe those 3 teams are the most talented teams we'll play from a talent standpoint, athlete standpoint. So I like what we did against those 3 teams. I like that we won those games. Was it a blistering start out of the gate? No, but I'd rather finish strong than start strong and fizzle.
I'm looking at the stat sheet, 4 games into the season. The forms have changed a little bit over the course of 4 games, but we're still seeing double-figure penalties, turnovers, 3 more on Saturday, missed field goal on a drive that could have ended well, but didn't. After 4 games, almost halfway through the season, and they're still seeing the same amount and type of mistakes from the team. What do you think it will take to hopefully get that to stop somewhat soon?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question. We've been trying a lot of different things and got to keep experimenting and find something to get the point across. Normally it's playing time or conditioning, and we've certainly done both, and we'll continue to do both, I think. You can explain all that stuff however you want, but whenever you're playing hard, you're going to get more penalties. You look at the teams that are the least penalized teams, and they're normally lousy, and they're normally not very physical. That leads to very few penalties. You want to be somewhere in the middle.
A good part about Saturday's win was easily Linfield's defensive performance. And they were down 21-7, gave up about 170 yards of offense at that point, only gave about 145 the rest of the game. Just really lived in PLU's backfield, it seemed like, after that point. What contributed to PLU's fast start on offense, and what changes were made in corralling them?
Well, they were pretty dialed in for us. That's another thing you got to realize is we're every team's game of the year, so the amount of preparation going into the game is probably always higher on our opponents than ours in terms of specific time allotted to what we do schematically. So what's happening, to get back to your original question, is most teams' special Linfield adjustments and all the stuff that they designed to take away what we do well or to exploit what we don't cover well are all shown very early in a game, and that's part of what's attributed to our slower starts. Teams have been pretty prepared for us, out of a respect factor, out of whatever you want to call it. And it's taken us a while in some cases to adjust to what they're doing. For instance, PLU's defense was completely different in nature than they had been against everybody else. And that threw us for a loop a little bit with the rerouting that was going on with our receivers, the lack of pressure. We were very concerned about their pressure and ready for their pressure, and they didn't pressure. So it was a nice little ploy on their part, and it paid some dividends for them. Played very vanilla and soft and coverage oriented, which they hadn't shown at all. Conversely, on the other side, I'm not even sure what your original question was. I got off track here, but something about
defensive adjustments.
Defensive adjustments. There you go. I think you're seeing that with most teams. Our first drive on defense on this season hasn't been great. We've been seeing teams plays, and it's taken us a while to adjust to that. Once we've kind of seen what they're doing and their plan of attack and their changes for the year, we've been able to kind of right the ship and settle in, make some adjustments, and lock in on what they do. I think you're kind of seeing that from game after game.
All right. And since the Linfield radio coverage of the game brought it up, I will too. they brought up briefly. Mickey Inns in 2012 already has 5 interceptions, whereas he had 7 off last year. Completion percentage is down. Most of the normal reasons that I've seen for quarterbacks dropping from one year to the next production-wise, new offensive line or new skilled players around him, which is not really the case with Linfield. You think that drop in production is simply from having the tough schedule that you've had to start the season with and the defenses you face?
I think all the above. Mick had a bad game against PLU. That wasn't his best game. His decision-making was poor. Those interceptions were really bad for him. That's not his normal self, and kind of strange to see that. There's some things that went into that we're not going to talk about, but we're concerned with that. The lack of completion percentage is completely dictated by the amount of man coverage we got in the Menlo and the Cal Lutheran game. So those games are a little bit of an anomaly. But he's played well when it's counted and been pretty productive for us, in my opinion.
All right. On to Whitworth. Last year, Whitworth started really slow and then kind of had a nice little surge to end the year. Now 5-0 this year. They just really seem like a program that's, at least right now, on the rise.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. I don't think they're. In fact, I know that their schedule is a little bit of a factor of some of the numbers they put up, as with Lewis and Clark, but they're a good football team. I've thought that and know that, and they're very sound at all aspects. They're very good at controlling the clock. They have a pretty nice varied offense where they play the extremes. They power it up in their double tight sets and then spread it out in their empty. So they do a nice job running their stuff, doing it well, executing it well, and they're pretty solid on defense and special teams as well.
In the preseason, some people thought that, other than Linfield, that Whitworth may have had the best collection of skilled players on offense. Brian Pearson, quarterback, Ronnie Thomas, running back, and all those wide receivers they have. At this point in the season, do you think Whitworth may be the toughest defensive assignment you guys have had so far?
Cal Lutheran's by far the most talented collection of offensive players we've seen and will see. I think Hardin Simmons had some tremendous athletes. I know they have. So I would still say that those are probably the fastest, most explosive players that we will see. That being said, I think Whitworth's extremely dangerous on offense. And as a schematic and a team, they may be just as dangerous.
Whitworth defense, not that spectacular statistically in a lot of areas, but they do have the #1 scoring defense in the conference at the moment. How does their defense stack up compared to Menlo, Calu, PLU's defense that they faced earlier this year?
Well, they're a little different. Pacific Lutherans is pretty frenetic, and they're normally a very chaos-oriented defense. They didn't play that way against us, but presented some very unique schematic challenges. I'd say Whitworth is a little bit more conventional, a little more bend but don't break oriented. That's probably the biggest difference with them.
And after 2 bye weeks and 2 road games against tough teams, how big will it be to have a home game after being away for a month?
I think it'll be real nice. It'll be real nice.
I think you've touched on all the things I wanted to ask about, but I want to follow up with a couple of them. The thing about spotting the ball on the place kick, is that something we've typically done and it's never been called, or is that something we did for the first time? Or?
I think that's probably been going on for years.
Yeah, just no one else saw it to reason to call. Okay,
I think it was kind of an activist call.
This game seemed to me to be dramatically different for PLU's defense. They typically create a lot of chaos and a lot of havoc. It seemed to me they probably blitzed a little less than they normally do. Is that fair?
Okay. They've normally been about 80%.
Yeah,
5-man pressure, and they maybe pressured 5 times, 5 to 6 times. So dramatic difference. Yeah.
And you would concur with what I think is a general consensus that Mickey didn't have his sharpest game.
No, he got rattled a little bit early and took some hits early, and that affected him.
And we seem to be a little unsettled about who our punt returner or returners may be. What's going on there? Why are we
We're
switching
still
guys?
rotating some guys, trying to figure out who has the best collection of abilities, and still working through that and sharing the load a little bit,
Yeah,
so
okay.
no one gets too taxed by it.
And in the way of odd statistics, none of the teams that we have played have lost a game subsequent to playing us. Menlo's gone 3-0. Hardin Simmons won their only game, 2-0 since then. Nobody that we've played has lost a game after they played. It looks like we've played some pretty good ball clubs.
It doesn't look like we
Yeah.
have played some 4 very good football teams.
Thanks, Coach.